Good evening. I'm delighted that you're all here this evening and happy to welcome you to a public lecture given by a return scholar and friend to Allegheny. My name is Rachel O'Brien, and I'm a faculty member in the Geology Department. And in conjunction with the Environmental Science Department, we had the opportunity to award a Allegheny College Ewalt Environmental Prize in 2018 to a scholar who is working on water supply issues. We chose Robert Glennon, who's here tonight with us, for that award, and he came to campus last year for several days, met with students, and delivered a public lecture. He liked Allegheny so well, we invited him back, and he has decided to come and is here this evening to give us a talk on a new research project that he's working on. The title of his talk, as you can see, is Eating Lettuce, Is It Safe? And his talk really focuses on the intersection of water supplies, agriculture, and energy in this country. So please, before we welcome Robert, would you just remember to silence your cell phones if they're with you? Robert's going to speak for about 45 minutes, and our hope is that his talk will bring up lots of questions for you. We've got handheld mics, and we encourage you to ask questions at the end of his presentation. So please help me give a warm Allegheny welcome to Robert Glennon.
Thank you. Thanks. Good evening, all. It's great to be back here. I loved my time here for a few days last fall, and when Rachel called and said, would I come back, I said, sure. A liberal arts education is something I had the fortune to have, and it's really where people learn with no, well, yes, with disrespect to the other colleges. Liberal arts is really where your mind is stretched, and so it's great that you're here. I'm going to talk about something that's brand new, that's unfinished. I think I'd like to keep this kind of casual. You can wait till the end if you have questions, but if you have a thought along the way, just let's have a discussion about it. I work in the area of water. I teach about it. I write about it. One of the courses I teach is called the Colorado River. And in that class, I take students every year over to Yuma, Arizona, on the border with California, and we explore the region. And it's this amazing farming region that I'll tell you more about in a few minutes. And in the last 4 or 5 years that I've had this field trip, I've learned a lot about food safety. I had no idea what food safety is. How many of you know what food safety is? Yeah, it's about the same. Well, think recalls. You know, peanut butter, hamburger, something, you know, something's been recalled. That's food safety. But this is a different kind of food safety. This is lettuce. How many of you like salad? Yeah. How many of you don't like salad? A couple guys in the back, come on, you can't. Oh, everyone likes salad. Okay. I mean, we all eat salad, right? And this is a story that should be of interest to all of us. I start with a woman, Louise Fraser. She was 68 years old last year. She lives in New Jersey. She went to a Panera Bread restaurant, had a Fiji apple salad, had romaine lettuce in it. A couple of days later, she gets sick. You may have read about this outbreak that occurred. She had a high fever and chills and was vomiting and then diarrhea, and the diarrhea became bloody. She goes to the hospital. They do a battery of tests. They find that she's contaminated with something called E. coli 0157H7. There's a lot of different E. colis, but this is a particularly nasty one. And it generated a kidney disease or illness with her that could have killed her. She was in the hospital for 13 days. She didn't die thanks to 3 blood transfusions, and they released her. She described it as the worst experience of her life. I wouldn't wish this on my worst enemy. So that's the start. And FDA said, well, the lettuce came from Yuma. Well, think about that. How does FDA know that? How do you figure out that a woman who ate a salad in a restaurant in New Jersey ate lettuce that came from some system all the way across the country? How do you know it came from that? And then how did the lettuce get contaminated with 0157? How did this happen? That's part of the process. Now you may be saying, well, but why should I care about Yuma, right? Well, for a very good reason. You could have been Louise. Because all of you who like salad, when you eat salad during the months of November, December, January, February, and March, you are eating lettuce from Yuma. More than 90% of the whole country's lettuce in those 5 months comes from Yuma. Leafy greens of every sort, anything that's an edible green comes from Yuma. The rest of the year it comes from California, one region 5 months, and there's a bridge season where there's a month on either end. But it's California and Arizona where this lettuce comes from. And so it could easily have been you as well as Louise. So I'm going to talk a little bit about water generally and then get into this food safety issue. So the topics I'd like to do, I'd like to give you a quick overview of what's happening globally in water, and then bring the situation home to the United States. I will talk about energy and water in the sense of climate change in water. That affects our water supply. And then we'll bring it down to Yuma. I'd like to talk about processing lettuce, food safety, and also consumer behavior. So first, the global picture. We're spoiled in the United States. We have plenty of water for most purposes. It's cheap, it's safe, but that's certainly not the situation around the globe. You look around the globe and you see of the 7 billion people on the planet, more than 1 billion lack access to safe water, 2.6 lack access to adequate sanitation, and very sorrowfully, millions of people are still dying from waterborne diseases, and very often these are young children. The world population projections from the United Nations are for a major increase in the population from 7.6 now to maybe 8.6 in a few years, 9.6 by 2030 or 2040, and even higher after that. And the issue is sharply etched. How are farmers going to find the resources to feed 2 billion more people on this planet? We have other resources. We're going to have to house them and clothe them and do that, but just feeding. How are we going to get more food production from our farmers? And in an era of climate change, it's going to be even more difficult because to grow the same amount of food, it's going to take more water. Some of the things that are happening that are kind of curious is in the American West, farmers are using a lot of water to grow alfalfa, not to feed their own cows or cattle, but they're shipping this water abroad. I wrote a story about this in the Wall Street Journal about 6 or 7 years ago. In the middle of California's worst drought, farmers used 100 billion gallons of water every year to grow alfalfa that they put in tankers and shipped over to China. Very curious. So that's one way of framing the issue. Bringing the situation back to the United States, I've written quite a bit about water policy. The situation is actually a fairly good one in recent years. The USGS did a report 4 years ago about estimated use in the United States, and virtually across every category, the water use has declined. Now, this is kind of interesting in an era when people are fighting about, do we want more government regulation, less government regulation? This is an instance where you can demonstrably show the positive effect of government regulation. Because under the Clean Water and the Clean Air Acts, industry and power companies have changed their practices and have reduced their water use. They were forced to. The Act said you shall use less. The Act said you can't put these chemicals into the rivers and streams of our country. And EPA even has a system that says you have to stop manufacturing toilets that use 6 gallons per flush. Now it's down to 2.8 or 2.4 or 1.4 in California. So you have lower flush rate toilets and faucets and sinks and shower heads, and all of that has had quite an important effect. But there are still some problems out there, and one of them is my home territory, the Colorado River. And this is the famous bathtub ring around Lake Mead. We've been in the middle of a 20-year drought. It just broke last year, but only apparently for a few months. Now the drought is starting to come back in. And the problem for the Colorado River is that there are literally more water rights to quantities of water than there is water in the river. Very strange. How could that be? Well, that could be because 100 years ago, when they divided up the river, everyone thought there was a certain quantity of water in the river. Call it 20. Well, it turns out there wasn't 20, there was 15. And now we have tens and tens of millions more people living in the Colorado River Basin, all trying to fight over the same amount of water. And then you introduce climate change, and the wheels start to come off the train. So this slide is kind of simplistic. It's not an artful science slide, crude arrows. But for me, it's a really powerful slide, because every one of those arrows is an important factor about our climate, and every one of them is pointing in the wrong direction. There can't be, I think, too many people who still doubt that climate change is real. How would you like to be Justin Gillis, who keeps writing the same story every year, like 2014, 15, 16. Finally he gets sick of it. He said, someone else write this year's, right? So now it's Nadia has now done it for 2 years in a row. And I expect in three more months we'll get the same 2019 projection about, in 2020 of January, we'll get the same projection about 2019. This is Oroville Dam. Is anyone from California? It's in Northern California. It's a dam that almost broke in 2017. There was an enormous, an unexpected snow melt, and 180,000 people were evacuated. And okay, well, what's that mean? Well, what it means is that our dams in the American West, where we store the snow melt, were sized for a hydrologic regime that no longer exists. It's quite clear under climate change that there, in the late fall, there's more rain when there used to be snow. And in the spring, earlier snow melt when there used to be additional snowstorms. And the engineers who created our dams, mostly in the 30s with Hoover and then on, 40s, 50s, 60s, all across the West, they were assuming a certain hydrologic regime, and that hydrologic regime no longer exists. And then, I'm surprised by this one, but finally climate scientists are saying that these ferocious storms of the last few years are climate-based. I think that's puzzling because we've always known that hurricanes depend on warm water to become more ferocious. Well, the water's warmer, right? That's one of the arrows on that chart. But what has happened in the past is that when the hurricanes stirred up the water and took up the warm water and became more ferocious, it also stirred up cold water. And when the cold water got caught up, suddenly the Cat 5 became a Cat 4, became a Cat 3, and it dissipates as it hits land. Well, one of those other arrows pointed to how deep in the water column the water is warming. So instead of cold water being upswelled during these ferocious events, you're getting warm water, and the storms are becoming more and more ferocious. And then finally, forest fires. I mean, the poor people in Paradise, California. That's the town that literally burned up last year. And just look at these. This is all one fire season. But that's part of the message. There's no longer a fire season. It's not the time of having forest fires on alert. It's now the whole year. You never know when you're going to get a forest fire. And all of the statistics show that these fires are bigger, last longer, devour more land. And what does that do to our water supply? Well, it does two things. One, in the aftermath of all forest fires, the next storm, like precipitation storm, produces rainfall that washes all of the burned detritus of the storm into rivers. So you get this contamination right after a storm. But the longer-term consequences are far more severe, because the destruction of the forest destroys where we store water, right? I mean, the quiz, the riddle for you is, where do the American states store their water? And you might say, well, behind dams, right? Reservoirs, that's where you store the water. Well, that's some of it, but most of it's just up in the mountains. It's just called the snowpack. Whether it's the Rocky Mountains or the Sierra or the Cascades, that's where the western water supply is stored. And forest fires are destroying the capacity of these lands to store water for us. If things couldn't get worse now, I mean, now if that's not a catastrophe, I don't know what a catastrophe is. Okay. So this is Yuma, Arizona, the bottom left side of the scale. This is a diagram of the Colorado River, 7 states from Wyoming in the top, Colorado. Anyone from Colorado? Anyone from Colorado? That's where most of the water comes from. As you can see, you've got the Yampa, the Colorado, and the San Juan River all coming from Colorado. And then you've got Utah and the other states. But the area I'm talking about is down right at the bottom, right at the border with Mexico and the border with California. And it is an extraordinary farming area. And this is an aerial shot of that. And if you look, Yuma is, this pointer isn't, Yuma is right here. And this is the Colorado River. And then down here is the Colorado River. See how it's a different color? That's because there's no water in the river down there. Water, blue, brown, dry river. All the water is taken out of the Colorado River right at the moment that it hits the border and above. So the areas that we're looking at, this is the Palo Verde Irrigation District in California. And then down here we come into Yuma. This is the Welton Mohawk Irrigation District. There's several irrigation districts in the city, in and around the city of Yuma. And then we cross into Mexico. And all of this is Mexican agriculture just below the border. If you go this way, you have something called the All-American Canal that brings water from Yuma over into California. And this is the Imperial Valley, and then the Salton Sea, and then you go farther north. So it's a very rich agricultural region, and it grows an incredible amount of produce. And this is what they're most famous for, and that would be iceberg lettuce. And this is a classic photo of how iceberg lettuce gets picked, farm workers. And as you can see, there are about a score of farmers out there picking the heads. But the head doesn't come as a head as you would buy it in the Safeway or other supermarket. It comes with all of these leaves sticking out of it. And the farm worker has to, with a machete, cut those extra leaves out, take the head and put the head in the case. So all of this foreground, all of this right there, the whole foreground of the picture, all of that are leaves that have no economic value. They're just left to desiccate in the desert sun. So another way of thinking about this is growing iceberg lettuce, you're using a lot of water to grow those leaves in the foreground that ultimately have no economic value for the farmer. And Yuma farmers have pivoted away from that. And this is now what they're doing. And they've been doing it for probably as long as most of you have been alive. Growing baby lettuces, red leaf, green leaf, spinaches, all the stuff, the arugula, these sorts of crops. And they are harvested in a completely different way. It takes 4 guys. It's a tractor-trailer outfit. You've got 2 drivers, and you've got 2 people working the boxes. So you've got the tractor on the left. On the right side, it's basically a giant electric razor. And the razor is cutting the lettuce leaves as it goes over it. They go up this conveyor belt. They fall into boxes at the back. The one worker moves them to the other side. The second worker places them on the box. And when you get down the end of the row, you're looking at something. Let's see. There's a closer view, and no, I don't have that. It's just completely cut clean. So food safety. There's a famous book, Upton Sinclair, written in 1905. It's a disgusting book to read. It's about the meatpacking industry in Chicago, diseased things and maggots on the food, and just horrible stuff to read. And the nation was appalled. And the next year, Congress passed, in 1906, the first Pure Food and Drug Act in direct response to this incredible piece of investigative journalism. In fact, he is sort of the beginning of investigative journalism, of exposés of things that people are doing, companies and others that are bad. So it starts really with the jungle. But then in modern times, it's really all about Jack in the Box in the 1990s. And they got into trouble. There were a lot of people who ate hamburgers that had E. coli and nasty strains of E. coli in it. And it turned out that as a company with lots of franchises across the country, Jack in the Box was cooking the meat to like medium rare, or maybe not even. So all of these things you probably are familiar with about don't eat meat that's too rare. That's to kill the bacteria that may be in it, which if you think about it is a pretty interesting comment. I mean, it's saying there is bacteria in your food, right? I mean, it could kill you. But if you cook it, it won't. There doesn't even seem to be any aspiration to eliminate the fact that there is bacteria in the food. And there have been some studies by Consumer Reports and others that have found samples where 100% of various testings had E. coli in it. So you really probably don't want to be eating raw hamburger. The next step forward from that, there's a middle step. There was a nasty spinach outbreak of E. coli in 2006. And it's, interestingly enough, it came from an organic farm. And they were able to trace it back to that one farm. But a lot of people died, and it really sent shockwaves through the farm industry. And the growers in Arizona and California said, we have two choices. We can get our own houses in order, or the federal government will do it for us. So they came together and they created leafy green management agreements, LGMA, leafy green management agreements. And they set up standards of conduct and codes. What are you going to do? Audits. You're going to have your fields audited, not by yourself, wink, wink, nod, nod. Independent auditor paid for by someone else. You're going to do testing and a variety of other things. And then a few years later, the Food Safety Modernization Act came in. Now we're at 2011. This is a classic example of people who are being regulated, asking for the regulation, because the regulation codifies what they are already doing. And if you look at economic history throughout the 20th century, whether it was banking regulation, antitrust regulation, a lot of those really pivotal developments all found that the big banks wanted regulation to squeeze the small banks out. And this wasn't necessarily to try to squeeze the small farmer out, but it was to say that we who are the big farmers have these codes of conduct in place. We are doing these things. And it's the outliers who aren't joining our agreements that are creating problems. So they passed this act. Notably, though, the act excludes small producers. So exactly what they were hoping to get is the precise thing that they couldn't get. And John Tester from Montana said, no, we have to protect local producers. We can maybe talk about that. I mean, and we will at the end of my talk. I mean, would you rather trust lettuce from a farmer's market or from one of these processors in Yuma? Okay, I'll come back to that. So that brings us up to 2011 and the act, which empowered EPA to do a whole bunch of things. They haven't done some of them, and that's created some real antagonism among certain people. Okay, now I want to get to this mystery. So this is Yuma. This is a field of romaine lettuce. This fellow is John Boltz. He's a terrific farmer. I've gotten to know him pretty well. He's also very active in one of the farmer organizations. And this is where FDA said the contamination came from. Not from his particular farm. He was not implicated, but from farms like this. Now, one of the things that's changed in the farm industry, rather than show you a slide of E. coli, let's go back to the pretty green plants. One of the things that's changed in the farm industry is that for convenience reasons, a lot of lettuce now comes in vacuum-sealed bags, right? Small bags or boxes, different spring mixes, all kinds of things that you can buy. And that's added a level of processing that has not existed up until now. For most farms, what happens is that food safety starts before anything goes into the ground. Most farms use fertilizers. Often those fertilizers are some kind of animal manure. Animal manure is where a lot of the E. coli is. So before you start using that, you want to be testing it. Not all that different than your compost pile. I mean, if you have something that's been composted and it's gotten to a certain temperature, it's going to kill the bad stuff, right? Well, you want to make sure that that's the kind of fertilizer you're using before you're going to put it on crops. So they use overhead sprinklers to water the new seedlings, to germinate them, and then they move to furrow irrigation, which is what this is. So these plants are all on beds. You can't quite see the detail, but they're about this high up. And the furrow is where the water goes, and then the plants are up on beds on either side. And you can see the pipes that go in to water the plants. Over the course of the season, there are 4 or 5 audits by these independent people to make sure things are going well. There's a sample of lettuce just before harvest. It's called N60. And that means that there are 60 samples of lettuce taken in a 5-acre patch and sent to a laboratory for inspection. So 5 acres, that's probably 80 acres or something. So, but each 5-acre section is going to have 60 samples taken and sent to a lab. And now it comes time to be picked. And so the picking crews are themselves a separate entity. They're not controlled by the farmer. They're businesses that just provide the picking crews. And sanitation never used to be much of an issue. Now it's a big issue. So there are porta potties and hand washing stands. There's hats and gloves and gowns, particularly if you're going to have lettuce that's going to be processed. That is, it's going to be, when it comes to you, you're going to just take it out of the bag and eat it, as opposed to what they call naked lettuce, which would be a head. They don't have to wear all these protective pieces of gear if it's done, if that's it. The assumption is when you get it, you're going to wash it when you get it home. Prohibitions on wearing jewelry, carrying anything in upper pockets that might fall out as you bend over. Every picker's tools are numbered. And then there are reports. The reports I found the most interesting. So here's the problem for lettuce, and what distinguishes lettuce from Jack-in-the-Box. It's grown outdoors. It never sees, the inside of a factory. And we eat it raw. It's uncooked. So most food is going to have been sterilized or pasteurized or boiled or something, so it will be pure. There is no kill switch for something that you're going to eat raw. And it's grown outdoors. Think back, or look at this. So do you think that a flock of geese heading north or south for the winter or summer, whatever, do you think a flock of geese might find that an attractive place to spend the night? Yeah. And what do geese do? Right. So now what do? Well, there's a food safety director for every farm who's in charge of people who then make accounts of every incident. It could be a flock of geese going over. It could be a dog running in, or a deer, or a javelina. It could be a senior citizen who's come down from Minnesota to spend the winter in their RV, and they just want to pick a little lettuce, and they go in their dirty boots and pick lettuce, dirty shoes and pick lettuce and go back. And all of those are a threat to the safety of food. And so for every instance, you need to document that, what this one farmer does. He documents it, there's a report, and then what do you do about it? And that depends on who's ultimately buying the lettuce. So the farmers are usually contracted by shippers who send the lettuce to someone else. You know, middleman, brokers and things like that, they're all gone. They've all been squeezed out. There are processor shippers on the one end, and then there are distributors and food service people at the other. So Walmart, Costco, right? They don't buy from brokers. They buy directly from shipper growers in Yuma. And they have different rules. One purchaser may say, okay, if you found that a dog ran in here, and you found some contamination that there's dog shit in there, then you have to take 10 feet out around from where the dog went in, mark it off with lines, and you just turn that lettuce in. You don't process it at all. One company says if a dog goes in, or geese, you know what you do? You forget that entire field. You know what company that is? McDonald's. They have the highest standards, McDonald's. Why? Anyone remember what happened to Chipotle a few years ago? Okay, right? You remember Chipotle used to be part of McDonald's, and then they spun it off, worst financial decision ever, until Chipotle got in trouble, and then their stock tanked. But they have most to play. So this goes back to the Food Safety Modernization Act. The ones who have the most skin in the game are the biggest ones with the most numbers of stores or restaurants or provisions selling the most. They're the ones who will go the extra yard to try to prevent anything from going wrong. Okay, so then the lettuce is sent to a cold storage plant for it to be chilled down using a vacuum system of chilling. And I didn't know anything about this. Yeah. It's chilled to 33 to 38 degrees. Within 2 to 3 hours, it's just flash chilled. Boom. Why? Because the lettuce, when they pick it, it's alive. The cells are alive. I mean, so when you think about lettuce wilting, well, that cell's dying. So this lettuce is alive, and they want to keep it alive, but they don't want it to be breathing too quickly. So they want the lettuce to go dormant so that it will stay in this state while it is sent across the country. Right now, the shelf life of lettuce that's processed in Yuma is probably 16 to 21 days. But if they didn't go through this process of changing how much oxygen the plant was taking in, they wouldn't be able to send it across the country. By the time it went from Arizona to New Jersey, the lettuce would be done. So then they send it through a processor. And this is a typical processor. There are 4 lines of product. that come into the plant. One might be spinach, one is romaine, one is something else. And it goes into this line, all computer done by the guy in the robe. He's got a sweater underneath or a down vest. It's like 38 degrees in this entire plant. And this is the process of washing. It's washed 3 times. The first 2 times, there's a sterilizing agent added to the water, not to sterilize the lettuce, to sterilize the water. So if there's something in the water something on the lettuce gets washed, nasty stuff could break off and cross-contaminate some other lettuce. But if it gets broken off into sterilized water, then the little bacteria gets zapped when it's knocked off the leaf. And then it goes into these spinners, right? Well, it's just like, use a salad spinner for your lettuce at home, right? Okay. Only now I want you to imagine this one. This one is 5 feet wide, 6 feet tall, and it holds 300 pounds of lettuce. And it's spun, and you get a dry like the stuff that the fellow is holding right there. So there's a photograph of what I'm talking about. It's sort of a little different than the processors that most of us, I think about. Okay, so now we've washed it 3 times and dried it, and now it goes up a conveyor belt, and it's going to be put into bags, and the bags will be filled with various kinds of lettuce. One might be 5 pounds of romaine, another one might be 2 pounds of red leaf or something. Now, when I think about this, and I think about these bags or boxes, I think of plastic bags, right? No. This is oxygen transmission rate film. What? Yes, OTR, oxygen transmission rate film. Remember I said they wanted the lettuce to be dormant? Well, it's going to stay dormant. This is highly scientific stuff that lets only a little bit of oxygen into the bag. So the content of the oxygen in the bag is between 0.1 and 0.2%. And then it's sealed quickly. Well, first it's backflushed with nitrogen to get all the oxygen out. Then they put it in, seal it, and then they label it with a QR code and with the production date, plant code, pack line production shift, the SKU, and a timestamp down to the second. Then it's put on pallets, put on trucks, refrigerated trucks, sent around the country, hours or a day and a half later, no matter where you are. It's going 24/7, those trucks. They arrive around the country. But then, that's not when the processor has finished the work. Then the processor, let me state that slightly differently. One of the big things in processing is to recognize you're bringing in stuff that's been grown outdoors. It's likely to have a lot of dirt on the bottom of these leaves. It could have things you need to worry about. That's why they're washing it. Well, how do you clean the equipment? And here's how they clean the equipment. Every day between the 2 shifts, 9-hour shifts, there's a 6-hour cleaning shift. A crew of 20 cleans every belt, piece of cutting equipment, floors, drains, walls, everything. The process starts with a quick dry pickup, then a rinse, and the application of chlorinated alkaline soap. Workers foam and scrub the areas that need it and finish up with a final sanitizer, either peracetic acid or quaternary ammonia. That's done every night. And then on weekends, on Sundays, they shut the whole plant down to do a deep cleaning when we do preventive maintenance that they can't get done during the week. Trace back. Okay, so Louise Fraser got sick. FDA thinks it came from Yuma. How do they know? Well, this is like something for CSI. So imagine that all the TV shows you've seen, CSI especially, but just a police detective who's looking at it, trying to figure out a serial killer. And they start putting pins on the map, right? And like, where did the killer go? What was the victim like? All this information, trying to puzzle out what happened. Well, that's exactly what FDA does, or the Centers for Disease Control in coordination with the FDA. They have something called PulseNet and something called Genome Tracker, and it uses whole genome testing to identify what's going on. So here's the pathway. Can you read those letters in the back, or are they too small? Too small? Yeah, okay. So it goes from, so this is poor Louise, the ill person. Then she goes to the doctor. The doctor takes a specimen. The specimen goes to a lab. The organism is identified, in this case 0157H7, right? Then it goes to a public health laboratory. Those are the networks that I'm just talking about. The FDA's thing is called PulseNet. So once you've got some nasty thing, there are 83 labs, state and federal labs around the country, that when you get something that comes within the purview of a public health problem, then you report, you upload your data to PulseNet or Genome Tracker. You can either do it about the food or about the patient. In this case, we're talking about Louise, so it's the patient. So it's PulseNet, and you do that. So that's uploaded. Then you do an epidemiologic investigation, an environmental investigation, and hopefully you've traced the product back. And if it's from a certain kind of peanut butter, you do one thing, but if it's lettuce, you would have a kind of recall. There was a problem for FDA. This outbreak started in March, but they didn't really identify that it was probably Yuma until April. But FDA's investigators didn't get to Yuma until the beginning of June. But remember I said you would eat lettuce from Yuma through March? Well, April and May came and went. There was no more lettuce in the market that came from Yuma. The shelf life was over, right? And really, the 21 days, if you think about all these steps, you know, it took her 3 days to get sick, right? She spent some days in the hospital. They send it to the lab. It comes back from the lab. You put it up on, you know, another pin on the board, like the crime scene investigation. And then you're trying to figure out where does this come from. And they create this traceback diagram that gives them a sense of it. Now, this is way too small, but let me walk you through it. So on this side, point of service, these are different restaurants that were serving lettuce that was processed lettuce. They know that, processed lettuce. And the reason why they know that and what's different is there was also a little outbreak. A prison in Alaska had 8 inmates get sick with the same unusual 0157H7 rare genetic footprint. It's eight people from this prison. That's this line in the middle, this flat line. Because this was the prison, and it came from only one farm. It was whole head lettuce to that prison. That's the only place where the prison got it. So that's a line where they know. This line here, they know exactly what happened. But for the other lines, well, varying degrees of knowledge. So they start with Louise up there, and they figure out eventually that Louise and some other people ate at this one Panera Bread or different kinds of restaurants, and they start to fill in their names, and then Panera Bread will be able to tell FDA, this is where we bought it from. We have the invoices of who sold us the lettuce. And that will bring you back to a shipper in Yuma. But then look how crowded it gets. Because you get back to the shipper, and that big plant, that processing plant with all those lines of lettuce, well, it's taking lettuce in from a bunch of different farms. And they're all getting commingled, right? You're putting lettuce, romaine from a bunch of farms together to have enough romaine line to run. And red leaf is here, and spinach is over there. And then even if you could get back to the farm, there's lots of different fields. So how do you know where it was grown and when it was sold? And without lettuce to test, FDA couldn't make that finding. If you could get back quickly enough, you could make a decision, you're the bad guy, or the negligent guy, or the unlucky guy. There was a second outbreak in November of 2018 where they were able to do that. It came from California, and they were pretty quickly able to go back to this one farm, and the California market was still in place. They tested that farm. They found the 0157H7 at that farm. But for Yuma, they were not able to do so. So there's a fellow by the name of Bill Marler, who's a lawyer. He's one of the nation's leading food safety attorneys. And there were 210 people who ultimately got sick in Yuma. 96 of them were hospitalized. 5 of them died. These patients came from 36 of the lower 48 states. And I asked him what he thinks caused the outbreak. And he said, quote, "What I'm doing in my litigation is 1,000 times more than the FDA did when it comes to traceback. I have subpoena power." So when you get into litigation, he can say, "You've got to give me the documents. I know that this was sold from here," and he can trace it back that way. And he said, if you take a look at the aerial photo of what FDA did find, it's pretty obvious what happened. And that's this. So this is a confined animal feeding operation. It's located in Welton, Mohawk, which is the easternmost of the districts that I had pointed to you on the map. And FDA took some samples from the Welton Mohawk Canal. The canal is on the left side, and you can see the blue part. So this is the canal bringing irrigation water past. Goes all along the outside of the CAFO. And FDA did a test. The growing season is over, but they tested the soil in the canal, and they found 3 places in the canal where there was the presence of 0157. Okay. So they think it's from the CAFO. FDA does. But they don't know that. But Marler says you don't have to be a rocket scientist. You look at this, quote, "Doesn't take a rocket scientist to figure out the likely source of 0157 in the Yuma Valley. It's cow shit." Now, he's hardly alone in reaching that conclusion. A bunch of people said the same thing to me. As you can imagine, a lot of people did not want to speak with their names attached or on the record, because this is pretty heady stuff. You know that he's going to sue your ass if he thinks you've got anything that's wrong. For the confined animal feeding operation, it's no secret that cow manure is most often the place where E. coli is. They are the carriers. It doesn't make the cows, the cattle sick, but when they poop in their manure, they spread it. And so, and a cow, you're going to like this statistic, produces 62 pounds of manure every day. Every day. This CAFO is capable of fattening up 110,000 head times 62 pounds, okay? You want a problem of manure? How do you get rid of this manure? 110,000 times 62 pounds every day. Literally a mountain of manure. So it seems pretty obvious, right? But there's only a problem. Actually, there's a bunch of problems. The FDA tested the CAFO soil and tested the animals. They didn't find it there. And they didn't find any particular reason or how it got from the CAFO into the canal. And if it did go through the groundwater, which I think Rachel and I probably think was the most likely route, well, this is odd because the FDA found it in 3 places. The CAFO was here, and they found it upstream from the CAFO, at the CAFO, and downstream. Well, how did it get upstream? You know, water goes downhill. It doesn't go uphill. So how did it get up there? So FDA, in the end, was not able to say conclusively that it came from the CAFO, just as FDA was not able to say it came from this farm. All it could say is it came from Yuma. Now for Marler, he doesn't care. Why? He's got the deep pocket. He's got Panera Bread on the hook. They're in. They're all the way in. He doesn't care which farm produced it for Panera Bread. It's strict liability. It's not nuisance or negligence where you have to prove that someone did something wrong. It's a bit like if you sue Ford Motor Company for a car that rolls over because it had defective brakes, Ford Motor Company said, well, we didn't make the brakes. We bought them from a supplier. Right? You lose, that's a frivolous argument. They sold you something, they're on the hook for whatever the suppliers did. And so it is here. So the rules that are happening for food safety are coming precisely from those who have most to lose, and the ones that have most to lose are McDonald's and Costco and Walgreens. Those are the ones who have the most to lose. Now, I want to finish up in the next few minutes. A bunch of other theories out there, but I'm going to jump over them. I think I've covered the basic idea. So imagine being a farmer in Yuma. I mean, you're growing food. You're eating the same lettuce. And you're so happy and proud of what you do. And suddenly the stuff is making people sick or even killing them. I mean, I talked with a woman who'd been in the business for 20 years, and she started crying, just thinking back to what had happened. I mean, she's been in the biz, her husband's a farmer. How could this happen to us? With all that we do, how could this happen? Just, horrible, horrible feeling about what did happen. So, in a way, it's down to what's called the last mile to the consumer. That's where things break down. And I have some pictures of consumer behavior. This first one, you may not be able to see this, but the top right-hand side boasts that this bag, quote, capital letters, does not contain romaine. All right? And this was a picture in the supermarket in Maine last week that I took. I had heard about it and I found it. So the romaine market is utterly cratered. And that's why some of the people don't want to be mentioned in my article. Just putting my name in it is going to scare my customers away. I wasn't implicated. I had nothing to do with it, but I don't want to be scared away. But we have to take, as consumers, some responsibility for our own behavior. So I say to you, when you have that shopping cart that you're pushing around, and you've got that seat on the top, what do you put in the seat? Or in the cart? Well, here's something that you put in the cart that you probably don't think too much about. Oh, it's so cute. Do you think that's sanitary? Do you want to be using the cart after this person? And it is great that the dog's eating lettuce. I had to really enjoy that part of it. No, of course you don't. Now, how about this? Do you feel any better about the baby's diaper being where you want to put your head of lettuce or your tomato? Huh? Right? Okay. How about a woman's purse? Where do you put your purse, right? You put it in the, right there. Where's the purse bin? No, I don't want to think about that. And then when consumers get it home, they wash it in the sink, which may have more bacteria than any place else in the entire house. So we have to take some responsibility for what it is we're going to do going forward. Well, where am I going to leave you with this? I mean, what are we to do? The industry is taking amazing steps. They're moving to try to achieve perfect traceability. They're using blockchain technology, digital ledger technology, so that they can go instantly back. Walmart's done that. They can now trace it all the way back. Here's the problem. They can go back to the farm. They can see what field it came from, what date, time stamped, how it blended with the lines in the processor plant. But when it gets to Panera Bread, what happens? Or when it gets to the restaurant, the restaurant or the supermarket, what happens? The first thing the worker does is to take the lettuce out of the box and throw away the box. Okay? Well, it doesn't matter what label you have on it. With all of this good information, if you don't take it and zap it and record it that it was inputted, And so that's what they're trying to do. Think airplane ticket, recording your bag. Think Amazon or FedEx. You order something on Amazon, how you get it, they can tell you exactly where it is. That's the kind of stuff they're trying to do for traceability. And I think they have the possibility of achieving it. But you know what? That will let us know where it came from. It won't stop people from getting sick. It may confine the scale of the outbreak, but it won't prevent harm from happening in the first instance. So what are you going to do? You're going to stop eating lettuce? I hope not. I mean, everyone says that we should continue to eat lettuce. That's healthy. We don't eat enough lettuce. Will you wash it more? FDA even says triple wash lettuce may not perfectly do the job. I don't know about you, I don't intend to change my behavior on triple washed lettuce. I mean, the reason why I pay that premium for it is so I don't have to wash it, right? And frankly, given this choice I presented to you earlier, would you rather take your lettuce from the farmer's market or from this processor that's gone through this? My money's on the processor. I may like the farmer's market. I really don't know how well they're up on food safety, who's handling the product, how it's been. And so I just as soon take my chance with the triple washed stuff. Well, you may say, well, I could buy organic. Yeah, but remember, the spinach outbreak was organic. Organic folks use a heck of a lot of manure. Just because it's organic doesn't mean you won't get 0157. Well, farmers markets, I disagree with you. Okay, buy it from a farmer's market. In Pennsylvania, that's not going to help you in January, or in February, or in March. In most parts of the country, during those 5 months, the markets are down. So if you're going to eat lettuce, from November to March, it is going to come, 90% of it is going to come from Yuma. So I don't really have an optimistic message. How about that, huh? I want you to live with a certain amount of ambiguity and risk. And we don't like that. We don't like that at all. I mean, we expect perfection. If you have your knee operated, or you buy a car, or you buy food, you expect it to be perfect. But when you're buying something that's grown outdoors and eaten without being cooked, perfection is a pipe dream. I mean, I think Yuma farmers and growers and processors have done pretty well. But pretty well doesn't get it done. They can't say that. I can say that. But if it's your mom or sister or friend who gets sick, you don't care that they did a pretty good job. You're angry as possibly can be. The chances of getting sick, tiny. More likely you get hit by lightning. These people are putting out 50 million servings every day, and 200 people get sick over a certain number of years. So it's small, but it is real. There is a certain measure of risk in eating salad. Well, I'm sorry, I didn't intend to go quite so long. You've been very patient, and I appreciate you coming tonight. Thanks. Thank you. Any questions, comments?
Questions for Robert?
Please.
So I have a question. This is kind of random, but so most of the outbreaks that happen are on specifically romaine lettuce. And is that just because, I know you mentioned that romaine is grown outdoors. So are other lettuces they grown more indoors then?
Yeah. No, they're all grown outdoors. So that's been one of the mystery parts, the CSI parts of this. Why was it just romaine? And it's kind of interesting. They're thinking, could it have been a weird weather outbreak? They had a hard frost. The frost killed some of the exterior leaves. They started to get hard. Then they had a big windstorm. And did the windstorm carry bacteria, and it got caught in romaine? There is one food safety person who thinks romaine is more dangerous because it's got the uplifted leaves. It's different than every other lettuce and the sort of the architecture of it, if you will. So there is that. There's no proof to this. It's one more of the theories that they're trying to explore. The people in Yuma are just pulling their hair out. I mean, they'll give anything. Said, people want us to fix it, fix it, fix it. If we knew what to fix, we would. But they don't. They don't know. So they've tried lots of stuff. The processor that I'm talking about, he won't buy now anything from within 3 miles of a CAFO. He said, never mind this 400, 1,200 feet. If your farm's within 3 miles of a CAFO, I'm not buying it from you. So there's a lot of attempts to do better, but perfection, not yet. Please, would you pass that down to her? Yeah.
The picture that you showed of the CAFO
Yeah.
and the canal, the green on the other side, are those lettuce fields?
Yes.
That's really close.
Yes, it is. It's pretty, isn't it a great photo?
We're really smart people, aren't we?
Yeah. Well, there's this too. So this is Five Rivers Cattle. They're out of Texas. They're the biggest feedlot company in the country, and they recently bought this plant. Now, this CAFO's been there for 50 years, and never has there been an outbreak traced to it. So some people think, well, maybe that's it. Maybe their standards are not the same as the former owners. And just because they didn't find 0157 when they tested the animals or the soil in the CAFO doesn't mean it wasn't there, because these animals are transitioning in and out all the time. They just weren't there by the time they got back to Yuma in June, but maybe in April, had they gotten there right away, they would have found it. We don't know.
Sorry, I have another question.
Sure.
Have you seen any options, different options that are more sustainable and more localized for growing lettuce during the winter in northern areas?
I have. It's called vertical agriculture, and it's grown in greenhouses, and it's a bit like terraces, and it can be hydroponically with no soil. It's in a confined environment. It uses less water. They don't find any need for pesticides, for example. You can't bring that to scale. I mean, the big one that I know is in Brooklyn. Okay, so people in Manhattan can afford to pay whatever you want for lettuce. But when you talk about feeding the US and Canada, which is where this lettuce feeds people, hundreds of millions of people, you're not going to do it with vertical agriculture. Sure.
I just saw one of those today. There's an aeroponic farm out in Springboro, which is about a half hour from here.
Yeah.
He's doing basil right now, but he's looking at doing strawberries.
Yes.
And not bringing it to scale for all of Western Pennsylvania, but maybe for, I don't know, Parkhurst, which is our campus dining company, and
Yes.
a couple restaurants.
Yeah.
Thanks.
I'm going to keep buying the lettuce in the boxes. Maybe I'm just rolling the dice, my time will come, but not that I don't appreciate farmers markets, love farmers markets, fresh tomatoes and fresh strawberries, not the red things that have no flavor or taste. I'll stay around as long as you want, but it's getting late and you've been here for a long time, so once again, thanks for coming out. Thank you.